Okay, everyone. Well, we're about to get started. This is our first webinar, applying to grad school. A little background on this. I applied to grad school a couple times, had no idea what I was doing, and finally got help from a friend who happens to work at UC Davis and got accepted, thankfully. And I don't want anybody else to have to go through what I went through. So we're having this webinar. So we have, can we go ahead and have our speakers go ahead and introduce themselves? Stacy, do you want to go first since you're the one next to me?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Camp. I am Associate Professor of Anthropology and the Director of the Campus Archaeology Program here at Michigan State University. And I'm also the newly appointed Graduate Program Director.
And Josh?
Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm Josh Reno. I'm a professor of anthropology at Binghamton University in New York, not the part that's about to get hit with a blizzard. And I'm also the director of graduate studies.
Corey?
Hi, I'm Corey Ragsdale. I'm an associate professor of anthropology at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville.
And Sandhya?
Hi, my name is Sandhya Narayanan. I am an assistant professor of anthropology in the anthropology department at the University of Nevada, Reno.
So thank you guys for being on the webinar and share your experience and knowledge with us today. I do know a few people who had registered for the webinar who are unsure about whether or not they even want to go to grad school. So do you have any advice or suggestions for those who are unsure whether or not they should apply or just head straight into the workforce? Anybody can answer this.
I'm happy to go first.
Sure.
I usually ask people first when they talk to me about it, are you independently wealthy? And if they say yes, I'm like, okay. And that's only kind of a joke. It can be very expensive to go to graduate school. Not every graduate program helps with tuition. Not every graduate program provides funding. Not every graduate program provides funding that covers living expenses or past debts one might have, or medical bills one might have to pay, or costs of having a family. So then if they say no, which most people do, then I talk to them about those issues exactly, that going to graduate school might cost you money. And even after you get your degree, the most debt I went into happened after I got my PhD, as I was on the job market trying to get a tenure track job. And that's my other question, which is, what do you want to do with the graduate degree you're getting? And there's more things to say about that, but I'd love for others to chime in.
I could chime in. Oh, go ahead, Sandhya.
Oh, yeah. I echo everything that Josh said. I also ask students, I like to actually advise undergrads. If they say they want to go to grad school, it's like, that's great. You should still work first. Because a lot of them, you spent all this time studying, you've been a full-time student. I think it's important to understand that you have a life. At some point, you're not always going to be a student, and it's important to have that perspective. So go try something else, see what else that you want to do, because I think just exposing yourself to working different kinds of jobs, seeing what else is out there might actually help answer some of the other questions of, why do you want to go to grad school? What type of program do you want to go to? And then even do you want to just do a master's? Do you want to do a PhD? Because those are two very different time commitments. And if all you've known is being a student your entire life and you're thinking grad school, it's actually hard to even think about why am I, you will look at me as a lot of them do. It's like, why are you even asking me this question? How dare you? It's like, no, it's really important to actually get additional experience so that you actually know that these are really real questions that you should be asking yourself even before you apply. So actually, I try to encourage all of my students, that's very nice. How about a job? Let's get you a job first, and then we'll talk about grad school later. My email will always work.
Corey, did you want to?
Yeah, so I'm a bioarchaeologist, so I get students that are either going down the biological anthropology route or the archaeology route. And I get a little bit of both. So with that said, there are actually entry-level jobs coming straight out of undergrad in both these fields. And so when I have students that are considering going to graduate school, everything you both had said is also in the conversation that I have with them. Especially so if they do decide to go to grad school, like what kind of grad school do you want to go to? Because they're not all one mold, right? They're all sort of a little bit different and they serve different purposes. But my biggest question is, do you need to? And the reason is, if you're just going, which you'd be surprised how many students just go to grad school because they think they need to, or they just they don't really have any, they're just like, well, I'm in school, I'm going to keep going to school. And that becomes really taxing when you get into the graduate level. So I've found that the students who have really either they've taken time off to work, or they know they're ready and they need to go this route straight from their undergraduate degree, when they have a goal at the end and they know they need to accomplish this in order to get to that goal, they're a little more motivated, and it really helps during the really hard times, which will happen. So that's always because really in a lot of job fields, you don't need to. You could eventually take your time with a master's program for promotion purposes or something like that. But in a lot of cases, the job you might want, you can just get without having to go to graduate school. So that's, I think, one of the biggest questions that I always ask.
I think everyone has said really good things, so I don't have a lot to add, but I think what Corey was saying is, in archaeology, I'm an archaeologist, there are a lot of really good jobs, especially right now, of doing shovel bum work or field tech work. So I think getting that experience is really, really important in at least my subfield. And also, depending on the kind of job you want to go into in archaeology, you actually need a substantial amount of field work to be a qualified archaeologist in this country, at least. So if you can do that work before you do your master's degree, you might be ahead of some students who have gone directly from undergrad to graduate school. So in my field, in archaeology, I always recommend that students do a master's degree, because the majority of archaeologists are not academics in this country. They're working for federal, state, and tribal agencies, and sometimes cultural resource management firms, private firms as well. And having that master's degree really bumps up your pay grade. But sometimes you can also get your agency, your employer, to pay for that master's degree. I've had a few students have that happen. Or if you work for a university, sometimes you can get your master's degree paid for as well. So those are things to consider, at least in my subdiscipline.
So applying for graduate school, it's not like applying for BA at all. It can be overwhelming. Some websites aren't the most user-friendly when you're trying to figure out how to apply. So for students who are just trying to get started, what recommendations do you have to just take that first step and get organized? Y'all think like you're thinking very deep thoughts right now.
Well, someone mentioned earlier about talking to a friend who had applied to graduate school. I think that talking to people, like I was one of the first people to go to college in my family, but also no one I knew, like in my community, had gone to graduate school. Like nobody. Like people going to law school, maybe, but so it's helpful to know someone that you can say, "Am I doing this right, or what should I take into account?" Who can give you some advice. Failing that, like, you can talk to people in your BA program about who you're going to be asking for letters from them anyway. That's what I did. I sort of adopted new anthropology parents and was like, could you guys give me some advice? They took me to my first conference. They introduced me to people. They told me which programs to apply for. I didn't know any of this stuff. And, at least in sociocultural anthropology, when I was applying to grad school, I didn't know what the best schools were considered the best. At that time, it was when I applied, the University of Michigan, the University of Chicago, Berkeley were some of the top schools, some of those schools I hadn't heard of, barely at all as an undergrad. And so things as simple as that, like what the top schools are, you can't know unless you have access to someone with that kind of more or less elite knowledge of the system of prestige that exists beyond most of our awareness. but that is behind higher education. So it's really indispensable to have access to someone whose brain you can pick, who knows all that, who has all that social and intellectual capital that they don't think twice about, that all four of us know now, but we didn't always know.
So I can jump in. I started a few years ago. So my second year as in tenure track faculty, I had my first student that wanted to go to grad school. And so just coming from grad school recently, within a few years, even then I wasn't really familiar with the process, because when I had applied to grad school was like almost a decade before, right? And lots of things changed. Like the testing required, the requirements through the university and things like that. So the first thing I started with was, and I know in the next question we'll talk about like choosing your department, but you have to look at the graduates admissions requirements, which has really nothing to do with the department. The university itself has its own requirements that you need to meet, and those deadlines can oftentimes be different than the department. So if you're only having a conversation with people in the department, you might be missing out on a lot of things like, do I need to take this test? Do I need to have a reference check before this time or whatever? So I would go ahead and start with the Office of Graduate Studies before looking into the requirements for the department. And as far as the schools, the thing that I had started at my university with my students is, I know that I usually get maybe one a year that is interested in going to graduate school, and 1 to 2 a year. And so we started back in 2017 an Excel sheet, an Excel workbook actually. And in that workbook, we had all the different schools and the programs that each school would have, and then the faculty that correspond to the different programs. So if you're interested in bioarchaeology at Ohio State, for example, you would have all the list of people who you could look up. And the first student to do that had a lot of work to do, but then the next student inherited that sheet and then added to it. Like, I'm interested in these different things. And so over time, this became sort of like, over a few years, this became a massive workbook. And so it's a difficult resource when you start it, but you could actually probably put this together already, because you might know somebody from undergrad or something that has already been through this process. And on that Excel sheet, there's things like admission costs, application fees, for example, whether or not you need to have a GRE. And it's really a pretty basic thing, but to the incoming students that are considering graduate school, it's a valuable resource. And so if you don't have that available from somebody, I would create one, because it's a really good way to organizationally look at your options.
I think also that's sort of like going off that workbook, it takes a lot of planning. So applying to grad school requires you to plan. You need to have a plan. You need to plan well in advance. So if you decide, a lot of grad school programs are like, the application deadlines are basically around now. If you are starting the application process now, it is possible, but it's actually quite late in the game. Like, you need to plan, I would say, even like starting maybe a year in advance. And there's a lot of reasons why I say, like, a year in advance, right? You need to figure out all of the requirements for these programs, right? Like the difference between a departmental deadline versus the university level deadline. That's actually quite common. And you will never find it unless you like happen to go and check it out, and then you'll be like, oh, it's two different things. Different schools require different things. So do you need a test? Do you need a GRE? Do you not need a GRE, right? Like, what's with that? It takes time sometimes to get transcripts over. I mean, granted, I think it's easier now. When I was applying for grad school, which was also a while back, I had to get them like mailed, like physical mailed copies that I then had to scan in. Now they'll electronically scan it, but just in case, it's good to plan for those things. We'll talk about it later, like what is required, but you're going to have to write statements. And that is hard. And that's like another thing to ask when you're applying, right? Because these are things that are these statements are very different than what you use to apply for your BA for undergrad, right? And that you need time to like look at them, to figure out how to write a new genre, to figure out how to write these statements. And then you also have to figure out whether or not your program requires a writing sample. And you might want to like think about how you want to revise either a term paper or an honors thesis or something that you want to submit. So there's a lot of little itty bitty parts that comprise a full grad school application. And that will vary sometimes between the different schools. So it takes a lot of planning. So it's not just figuring out like what programs to apply for, but then once you figure that out, getting that timeline in place to then like ask letters of recommendation and submit your application by the deadline.
So Corey mentioned this a second ago. My mind just went blank. Looking for programs. When you're looking for a master's or PhD program, you want one that fits your interests. So what should students be looking for when they're looking at these different schools?
This is a big one.
Go, Stacy.
Okay. I teach a senior capstone class pretty much every other year right now in my department. And this is what we talk about for a good chunk of my students who want to go to grad school is how do you find that right fit? And I think the initial impulse, at least speaking from my very naive experience when I was applying to grad school, because I didn't know anyone that had gone through this in my family, is that you want to get in and you just want to start right now, right? And you want to get into that program, you want to get funding. I tell students to push back on that and pick the program that has all the funding they need, right? The funding that will support you through not the first year, not the second year, 5 or 6 years of the program, right? And a program where you're going to have a committee, not just one advisor, a committee of people that are going to be your cheerleaders that are going to support you. So one of the things that we expect of applicants who apply to our program is that they start to try and form a committee through the application process. They reach out to multiple faculty, have conversations with them. And what I tell students about this process is that the power is in their hands. If they have a conversation with a couple people and they realize that this is not a good fit for me, that's not a reflection of them and their interviewing skills. That's a flag for them to pay attention to, that if they're not connecting with faculty at that program, then maybe this isn't the right fit for them. If they feel like they're not getting support this round of the applications, then they might not get that support in their first year or second year, or even, down 6th, 7th year. So that fit is really important, that people are invested in you and care about your success in the program. So I think starting out and really just talking to faculty, which I encourage people to do that a year before they apply. I think that's really wise, because when people start to contact me at this point in admission season, when the application is due December 1st. I have tons of emails right now I can't get back to. I don't have time to talk to everyone. I can't talk to them at this point. So I say start as early as you can and really make sure that fit is there and that you're applying to a program that will support you the entire time you're at that program.
I think those are all great points. I often tell students, yes, absolutely, completely agree with Stacy that reaching out to people you're going to work with there. I don't think students always realize how different one way in which grad school, in my experience, is vastly different than undergrad. I don't know that I had that many one-on-one relationships with professors. As an undergrad, I worked in some people's labs. I came to some office hours. I got to know them through seminars. But I mean, you spend a lot more time interacting with your committee and your advisor, and you really, anything you can find out about them, what they're like to work with in advance. And, what I usually tell people is if someone ignores your email for months, they're probably going to do that when you're their student. If somebody responds really quickly to you at 4 a.m, that's probably what they're going to be like when you're their student. If somebody misses an appointment that you made, which happened to me when I was trying to meet people for go to grad schools, or they tell you, as one person told me, anthropology's dying, don't apply. It's like that tells me something about what their general, way of looking at the world is. The other thing I've started asking students, or questions I tell them to ask themselves, is, does it matter to you where you live? Some programs like Binghamton are like, we're kind of a big town, not really a city, and we're 3 hours from the nearest city. For some people, they really need to live in the Southwest or somewhere sunny, or it affects not just their ability to work, it can affect their whole mood and their ability to, be happy. Some people need to be close to family. Some people need to be closer to where their field work is going to be, because it's going to be hard to reach those destinations, paying for plane tickets, etc. So anything geographically that you can use to limit your selection process, that would be helpful. I've had students come work with me and come to work with me as a PhD student. It was a great fit. We seemed to get along really well. And then they realized early in the program that they really need to live on the other side of the country, and nothing was going to change that. And I completely respect that. I just wish they had known for their own sake much earlier.
I think also it's not just like the relationship with your committee, but also, I mean, your committee members are going to have other students as well. And your committee, so I think like it's not just with the committee, but also what are your relationships with those other students, right? Because you want to be in a collaborative, like fostering environment, right? Where you are all learning together, where people help each other, because you actually learn in grad school. I learned just as much. I think I was mentored just as much by my committee members as I was by older students of those same committee members. And in anthropology, I'm a linguistic anthropologist. I got a lot of mentoring, like really hands-on mentoring, a lot from the students who were just returning from the field as I was just starting. So it was really nice to get that extra perspective and that extra time, and to have access to people who are willing to help me. And I think that's equally important, right? So if you are able to get in touch with faculty members and you feel great talking with them, feel free to also ask them, like, are there students of yours that I can talk with? And not just to like get their perspective on what it's like to work with this faculty member, but you also want to like talk with these students to figure out, can I come to you? Are you going to be another person that I can also like lean on and work with and collaborate with? And, just help each other through the grad process, because grad school is a long haul and it will get hard. Everyone has a hard moment. So I get it. I think like getting as many strong network ties as possible is important.
Yeah, so these are all really the exact same things that I'm thinking everybody said. First of all, yeah, remember you have to live there, right? And so your way of life does influence your happiness, and your happiness will influence your success, right? So pay attention to that. Some people, they don't care where they go. They just go wherever. And if you're one of those people, great. But if you're not one of those people, then make sure you incorporate that in your applications, in your selection process. The other thing is that Stacy mentioned the first time, remember that you're not choosing to work with a person, you're choosing to work with a committee. And that's really important, because you might find a place where you can work with one person, but only one person. And that could make it very difficult for you to succeed. And this is not just for small universities. I remember when I was in grad school, I was getting ready to leave, graduate, and there was a student that was coming for an interview to be a grad student. And I was overhearing their conversation with my advisor. And they were talking, and they had a great time. And then the student went to another faculty member's office. I happened to be walking by their office, hearing their conversation. And I heard the faculty member say, if you think that so-and-so and I can be on the same committee, you clearly know nothing about my research. And so to me, that was two things. One, those two people are never going to be on the same committee. So how many options do you have? But two, do you really want to work in that environment, right? So, and it's hard. It's really hard to see that online and see that on paper, right? So you just got to be a little bit careful when you're talking to people, and sort of format the conversation that way. And the last thing I would say about choosing the place to go is it's tempting to think that you need to apply to the same 10 places, right? That everybody applies to. because it is true that there are some universities that are producing more graduates and people in the job market than others, right? There are universities that have really phenomenal departments, but it's better for you to go somewhere where you can work, because ultimately your success after graduation is going to be based on what you're able to do and develop while in grad school, right? So if you can go somewhere that's not on everybody's top 5 list, but you can go there and get a good project, get working, get in the field, get publications going, things like that are going to help you into the job market later on, go for that rather than taking, just this is a big school, so I should go there, right? And in some cases, it's all individual, right? So make sure that you're considering that. Don't discredit a university just because you've never heard of it. Okay, so that's one of the things that I think that a lot of students just don't really think about. There's like, well, in my field, this is the school, so I should go there, but it might not be for you.
So you guys touched on this already a little bit. This is something I did not know when I first applied for grad school. How important is it for students to be contacting professors in advance? And if they do not contact you in advance, how likely are you to accept that application?
I'll go first this time. So important. It's so important, for lots of reasons, right? I always tell my students, like, did you read something that you really thought that really spoke to you? Who wrote it? And the reason, I wouldn't say that it's required to get accepted, but there are a lot of reasons grad students don't get into grad school that have nothing to do with them. And those, you could save a lot of money by figuring those things out early on. So for example, when I was applying to grad school, I had 5 schools on my list. One of them, the person I wanted to work with, died. Like, I didn't know because they didn't update the website. And so they died like the semester I was looking into school. And the other one was the other school, the person I was going to work with was getting ready to go on maternity leave. And so she was like, I'm not going to take students next year, or maybe the year after. So if you can wait a few years. But that saved me a lot of money because I would have got that answer back anyways at some point. Right. So there's I think it's a really good practice to contact people. And I don't know if I speak for everybody, but I have personally never been agitated by a person emailing me asking about graduate school. It's never been a problem for me. I actually enjoy it. I don't say, oh, that person's going into the front of the top of the stack, but I don't mind it at all. I think it's a really good practice, and it's a good way to start a conversation about some of these things that you need to know anyways. Like, is there support available, or is there a project available, or something like that? And I think a lot of faculty are like, well, guess what? I actually got a grant and I'm looking to take 2 students next year, or whatever, right? And so that has to be a conversation, and I don't think that conversation doesn't happen just through the application process. That's my my take on it.
Anyone else?
I'll just add, some programs don't allow faculty to talk to students during the fall of admissions season. So if someone responds that they're not allowed to talk to you, that doesn't mean they don't want to work with you. It may just be the rule of the program. That is not our rule at Michigan State University. I try to talk to applicants as much as I can. Sometimes I get a lot of emails and I can't respond to all of them because I prioritize the students that are in my program and their problems and questions first. But I think the responsiveness is important. And I think talking to the person you want to have as an advisor is 100%. I would not apply to a program to work with someone if I haven't had a conversation with them regularly.
I think to follow up with Stacy, like because I went to a grad program, I think, where the policy was, when I applied, they changed it later after I got in, but when I applied, the policy was that they would not speak to applicants. But don't get dissuaded by that. What you should do is go to their website and ask and check to see if they have something called a graduate program director or director of graduate studies or graduate program coordinator, because that is the person who you should always actually contact that person, even if they're not, their specialty or area is not of your interest. You should definitely contact them, because they have insights into the basic boilerplate and nuts and bolts of the program as well. So while it's important to try and see if you can get conversations with faculty members you want to work with, it's also nice just to talk with someone to be like, what is a timeline like, right? Do you have expectations about when people are supposed to graduate? What are benchmarks in this program? What does candidacy mean? And that person is supposed to answer you with those questions. So definitely reach out to those individuals or chairs of the department as well, because if individual faculty may not be able to answer questions, those two individuals can.
I think that's a great point. Also, the department staff, like essentially the person who's the staff secretary, they often do a lot of the work behind the scenes and know how things work also. I'd just say briefly, I think the thing that holds students back from writing, even graduate students, when they're already in graduate school, from writing from professors, is like they're like not sure what to say, or they're worried. So I agree with what Stacey said. I don't mind I always happy to get emails, but also professors are really easy to talk to especially if all you really need to do, they're just spoiled children with fragile egos. Just say that you love their book, or their article, or their research. Like, they will swoon, because you do this work. It's like, you love it, it matters to you, and then it just goes out into the abyss and you never hear anything. And then occasionally someone comes up and says, I read that thing you wrote. You're like, oh, you're the one that read it? Oh my God, thank you. It really means a lot to us. So really, that's the easiest way to get in, is just say, I like your work, and then you basically got a friend for life in most cases.
I would just add one more thing, but it does matter what you ask, right? So it's good to get in touch, but there are things that I really just can't answer, right? And so I won't answer because I don't have the answers to them. So anything that you could find, like what's the deadline for application? If you could find that don't ask that. You could find that on the internet, right? You can find that on the webpage. What is OGS requirements or whatever? Those kinds of questions aren't the kind of questions you want to ask this person. What you want to ask this person is if they're, first, yeah, flattery is good, right? It's nice, because we in this network, we're not expecting a lot of undergraduates to read our stuff, right? And we're not really expecting it. So when it's done, it's like, wow, that's kind of cool that you read it. So it's not really like a flattery. It's more like I read this and I know that I like this, right? Rather than, oh, you're a person that does this, so we're probably compatible, right? And so, but just tailor your questions. And if you have an advisor or somebody that is like a graduate student advisor or undergraduate student advisor or something, it's not a terrible idea to kind of go through them as far as to the appropriateness of your questions, right? To ask, like, is this the kind of question I should be asking this person? Or something like that. And I know from my students who have emailed the few people that they wanted to work with, they've gotten really good responses. And sometimes there was one case where I had a colleague who emailed me and said, I can't respond to this email, but please tell so-and-so that, I'm unable to do this for, whatever reason. You're not allowed to contact them or whatever. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea to do it, but just be careful and think about it before you start those questions.
Before I forget, again, just to let everybody know that we will make sure to have time at the end for you guys to ask your questions, and Les is keeping track of the chat so that he can relay those questions to our speakers. Do any of you have any more else to say on that? Nope. I will say from my own experience, actually, how far in advance should students be contacting professors? I personally have spent like the last 3 months contacting people. So, and honestly, it did not seem like that was even enough time.
As a grad program director right now, I'm in the thick of it. because I not only am handling admissions, but I'm also handling our current students and all the things that they go through. So right now is not a good time to contact me personally. So if you can do it maybe in the early fall or even the late spring or even last year, that would have been better. But I think right before admission season, we're already discussing applicants right now, even though the deadline is December 1st, we're talking about who's applied and who we're considering, because we can't take everyone, obviously, and faculty have to agree upon who we're going to bring in. So sooner, not in the middle of admission season.
Yeah, and our deadline's January 1st. So we're not where Stacy is right now, but we will be then. And so now is when it's good to contact us. It just goes back to what some people have said, which is, knowing something about the calendar for each place you're considering and knowing in advance so that you know when a good time to get answers to your questions.
And also keep in mind that some people are in the field during the summer, so their responses could be delayed during that time as well.
So speaking of applications, when you guys are looking at applications, what are some things that you are looking for, or things that you're hoping to stand out to you that makes an applicant appealing?
It's nice if you can say something that's specific to you. I think some students, and this is probably just maybe American culture, think that what's unique to them is what is the media they consume. But that's actually not unique to you. It just feels unique to you. So for example, we have a forensic anthropologist, and do people apply to Binghamton because it's somewhat of a rare specialty, so people apply here in forensics. And I, as grad director, read a lot of those. I had to read all those applications, and a lot of those students reference the TV show Bones and think they're doing so makes it unique, which is funny. And it's not their fault. They're looking for something to say. And they're probably being honest that's where they came across something, because there aren't many popular representations of anthropologists, although there's this new horrible series in archaeology that some of you guys can speak to maybe. But anyway, so not talking about like TV shows, but like something that is about your experience, and everyone has a unique experience that got you interested in the discipline, that made you interested in anthropology. And then even more specifically, if students could, in their personal statements, explain, and this goes with other things we've said, why this program. Because sometimes we get students applying and they say, we want to study cultural anthropology at Binghamton because we really like culture. Culture's great, which okay, but they don't say anything about a particular professor or set of interests or anything that really ties with our particular group of cultural anthropologists. They could have sent that personal statement anywhere. So anything that shows that you've taken the time to get to know the faculty in the program, looked at their profiles, see what interests connect with yours. You don't need to know what your project is, really. It helps in some cases. Some people really need to know, depending on your program. Some of our archaeologists, for example, in our program, it's better for them to have a clear idea. But you can have a vague idea of a project, but a clear idea of the kind of themes you're interested in, which shows that you belong perhaps in this program versus another.
I would also agree with that. I think that's actually like the big shift from undergrad to grad school, right? Because in undergrad, like if you think about applying for a BA, right, you put down major because you're like, I think this sounds cool. Or yeah, you saw Bones, right? And it's like, I think I want to do this because it's on, and that's great for an undergrad because you're blank slates, like, and that's the point. You want to be exposed, you want to learn, you want to explore, and we're here for that for undergrads, like, and like we're always here to support that. But at the graduate school level, it's a lot more specialized because you're not just here to like learn, right? You're not like, if someone applied and it's like, because I like language, it's like, well, that's lovely. Yay, linguistic, and we like language, like we like culture, but it's more focused because you are making a choice to do extra work after your BA. we want to make sure that you have an idea of what that entails and the kind of thinking and learning that it will require, right? And it's much more than just your interest in like language or culture or archaeology, but you're actually thinking you're interested or you're curious about specific themes, specific theories, maybe specific methods, right? And again, like as Joshua said, you don't need like a fully hashed out project, but what I like to sort of see is a sort of clear-ish idea of specific things that kind of interest you, how that not only fits with interests within the program, but also how there's potential to grow and change. And it's sort of how you sort of construct all of that into that narrative, right? It's like balancing that specificity with also this openness to that. But I feel like I will learn other things and my ideas will shift and change in these new ways because of the people and the environment that I will be working with at this particular place. And it's usually seeing that kind of balance in a well-crafted, statement, research statement, and personal statement that really makes applications stand out to be like, yes, this student really needs to come here because I think they will get the greatest benefit from being in this environment and learning and doing research in this environment.
So I'm going to go ahead, since we're getting close to our hour, I'm going to just ask one more quick question and then we'll go into everybody else asking questions. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see besides bones? What are some of the biggest mistakes you see in people's applications?
Not writing the right school in the application. If you're applying to Binghamton, do not write in, this is why I want to apply to University of Nevada, Reno.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's easy to spot a copy and pasted letter. It's really easy. I know it's less work, but it's so easy to look at something that is clearly been sent to 10 different places without any like personalization to it. Now, with that being said, so you don't want to be too broad because when I'm having grad applications, one of my top things, and of course, I'm concerned about their success in the program. Right. I don't want to take people who I don't think will not succeed, but I also have to be able to support them. And I don't want to take students if I can't support them. So how I can support them is through these different, a TA-ship or working in the lab or something like this. So when I'm reading an application, I'm like, oh, you know what? This person qualifies for this grant that we have or this thing that we have. And so it's in my mind as I'm reading about the person, like how, I'm learning their story. How can I help them? How can I support them when they come here? And for me, at least for biological anthropology students, I do get a lot of people who are interested in forensics, right? And I want them to succeed, right? So I don't want to take 20 forensic anthropology students and then see which one survives, right? But as a biological anthropologist, I don't want I'm a bit weary about an application that's too specific, right? Because if there's a good sort of concept of research development and critical thinking and all these things that were mentioned before, where like I was like, oh, this would fit really well. We could shape this person to go down this direction. If that's possible and if that's in there, that's something you can work with, right? We could say, well, you have this experience, so now let's see how you do here. But when someone's like, I am completely interested in this topic and this subject and studying this thing, and I just don't do that, or I don't have that available, that I can't really be certain that you're going to succeed because I can't help you. I can't help with that. So being really, really specific can be dangerous, right? If you're like, I am solely interested in doing this one thing, I want to work in this place in the world, that could be harmful because you might not be pragmatic. And oftentimes when people are reading graduate applications, it's because they're wanting to take one, right? And a lot of times when they're wanting to take one, they have an idea, a general idea of what they're looking for, right? Because it's written in their grant or whatever. So you got to be a little cautious. You don't shy away from your accolades. If you have experience, put it in there. all of it. But just try not to be super, super specific. Don't make yourself so narrow.
I got two things. One, biggest mistakes. One, students apply after the deadline we post, which is the deadline for which you're going to be considered funding. And they apply a week later, 2 weeks later, and then they aren't up for funding and they're dismayed, but it's because they didn't notice the timeline that we set. So that's one problem, not reading carefully or checking in with me or someone else about the deadlines. And the other is one of the most common reasons that we can't consider applications because students don't have 3 letters of recommendation. They have 2 or they have 1, and they're trying to get someone to give them 1. And this relates to the question in the chat, which is about how not to feel guilty. I don't know how to make people not feel annoying. I think one way to answer that question is all of us. I'm still asking, like it's been a long time since I was applying to graduate school. I am still asking my advisor for like letters of recommendation for things. Like, in other words, it's okay. Don't feel like you're being annoying because we have been that annoying person and we still are that annoying person asking other people to write me letters. Do you know what I mean? So we're in the same boat. Any professor you've had, they're only where they are because someone wrote them letters of recommendation. And they had to be the annoying person that asked. So don't feel bad at all about that.
So why don't we open it up for questions? If anyone has questions, they can go ahead and raise their hand since we don't have that many people. Anybody?
Can I add something to asking the letters of recommendation? And this might help with the guilt of annoying, right? One thing that I notice, right, and that I always try and do, right? When you're asking a letter of recommendation, it's also on the grounds that you feel like this person can speak about you in a very particular way, right? Like, you know, you think of these grad school applications as constructing your story. And you present one through the statements that you write, but then the letters of recommendation tell a different part of it, right? And grad committees are looking through all of that to be like, oh, so it's not just you're asking someone for a letter. You need to think about, well, why am I asking this person for a letter, right? If it's just because, well, they went to such and such grad school, so they might have connections, right? That's fine, but that's actually not your best bet, especially if you've never actually talked with this faculty. So part of that planning for grad school is actually planning the kinds of building of relationships with advisors now, which means, and this is like, you know, like when we tell undergrads we have office hours, and I tell them, it's like, oh yeah, you can just come and talk to me. That's actually real. You can just come and talk. Like, it's not just because how did I do on my exam? You can actually come and chat with us about questions that you have, interests that you have. And the more that you do it, the more that we actually see you more as just, oh yeah, you took my class, you got an A-. I think you wrote a decent paper, so you got an A-, so you can do grad school too. Like, no, but the student they have interesting questions and they're making connections in these different ways. And they like, even they send, you know, and they're interested in these things. And one time in class, they shared this, and one time they told me this one thing, but all of that together sort of helps us as letter writers really present you in the best light. So part of your planning timeline should be, you know, genuinely also trying to get to know us as your letter writers so that we can speak to you about these other extra things.
I just make a quick note about the letters. Make sure you give your letter writers time. That is the most annoying thing. There's like 2 days, you're like, I need this letter right now. It's not annoyed to be writing a letter. It's annoyed that you have to do it in 24 hours, right? That's the part that is not very good. The other thing is, unless you're currently working with the person, it's sending something along with the request, right? So I get students that have graduated a couple of years ago. They've been in the professional world, and now they decided they want to go to grad school or something. I want to know what they've been doing the last couple of years. It's going to make the letter a lot easier to write. Right, that's going to make the difference between a half page and a whole page or 2 page, right? Like, I have to be able to know what the person has done. So maybe you don't have a statement for the grad program yet, but if you do, send that, a CV, something like this. The more information you can give the person to write it, the not only the easier it's going to be for them to do it, but also the higher quality that letter is going to be. Right. So, and again, if it's like your undergrad advisor or something, they probably already know what you're doing. And so maybe they don't need a lot of other stuff. But if you haven't seen the person in a couple of years, a lot can happen in that time. And so it's always good practice, I think, to just send things along. It's almost always my first response to people who email me after a couple of years, like, can you write a letter for me? I'm like, can you send me something so I can see what you've been doing in the meantime? Right.
Stacy, I have a question for you. Like, I've had some archaeology colleagues tell me that like field school and what kind of field school and how much field school is like very important for their assessment in a way that it isn't for some of our other subfields. Is that your experience too?
I think if people want to be a dirt archaeologist, meaning they work in the field regularly and they want to run their own dig as part of their dissertation, then yes, you should have a field school. Obviously, the challenges of the pandemic for the last couple of years have made that exceedingly difficult for my students, to the point that some of them have delayed applying to grad school to get the field school after they've graduated from undergrad. So yes, if that's what you want to do, but if you have a plan to do collections-based research or some other sort of project that really doesn't involve a lot of field research, then I think you should definitely apply. And I would say in my field in historical archaeology, we're certainly leaning towards more collection-based, orphan collections kind of research. So it depends on the project, right? And the methods and skills you need. I never planned to be a dirt archaeologist. I went into a program planning to be a cultural anthropologist of archaeology, but I did have a field school, and I became a dirt archaeologist. But I got a lot of experience as a PhD student in dirt archaeology, and I looked for programs where I would get that. So if you are lacking, especially right now, I think that people are definitely thinking about, okay, how can we help these grad students get the experience that maybe they missed out on the last couple of years?
There's a question in the chat about applying abroad, and I would just point out, because I spent some time in England at Goldsmiths College, and it was very clear to me there, which I didn't know before, which is that, their undergrad experience is basically 3 years. And so it's a different kind of student that's applying to graduate school. And their graduate school experience typically was less time, was like 4 years, which also meant that if you were an undergrad applying to UK schools, in a way, you were like further along in your development as a scholar than a lot of the other students in graduate school. And you could see that difference. And it's just it's just because of those different programs. So that's something to keep in mind when you apply abroad, is that not all these higher education systems work same way, and you can make them work more or less to your advantage. So it's a good idea to do graduate school in some place like the UK, for example, but not as good an idea to do undergrad there if you're coming from North America.
I would say the experiences of my colleagues that work in Germany, it's a very good place to work for graduate students, and they will always 100% support their students. They don't take students unless they can completely support them with a visa, with funding, with a lab job, all of that stuff. But and it's a great place to work, but the same rules apply as far as, make sure you can live there, make sure you can relocate there, make sure that you get an idea of who you're going to be working with, and all of those things. But and keep in mind that their application process could be different, right? Because of things like getting you a visa and getting funding for you, it could be a lot longer of a process. So if you're thinking about applying overseas, you should definitely be starting early for that.
I just wanted to add one thing, and I haven't had a chance to say it, and this applies to any program you apply to, but the staff make our programs run. So, and faculty know this, like they know the rules of our programs way better than we do. So please be polite, be patient, be thankful, be gracious to them, because they're under a lot of pressure, and often, especially right now, our offices can be really understaffed, other offices across campus. So sometimes people are waiting to hear back from another office that's missing 3 people right now. So please be thankful, be kind. And I will say the reason that I got through my PhD program was because I had amazing staff in my program who supported the grad students and always had answers for us.
Looks like Lydia had a question. She says, looking back at your personal application experience, is there anything you would have changed or done differently?
I'm just going to say not apply to 18 schools, because I really wanted to get out of working in my job. I like my job, but I knew what I wanted to do. I was really excited about my research project. I had already done field research on it as an undergrad, which I think is kind of unusual abroad. And I just wanted to go. But looking back, I was very lucky to get in the program that I did. It was a perfect match for me. It's what set me up for success because of the nepotism in academia. So I think picking the right program and the right people and the right funding package is 100% important. Don't apply to a bunch of programs because you just want to go to grad school and start your program. Pick the right one because it matters.
I just say briefly, and then I have to go, unfortunately, but I would have talked to my partner, who I'm still with now, years later somehow. She tolerated me, and I just applied to grad schools, and we didn't really make it a discussion between us about where we would want to live or where they would find work. They weren't going to grad school, they were going to private sector, and I can't believe I didn't even think to make that a conversation, because you think of it as such an individual decision, even though I knew we were going together. And I really wish, I think it probably wouldn't have gone differently, but I would have felt less guilty about dragging them along to, in my case, Ann Arbor.
So Cassidy had a question. Do you have thoughts or advice about applying to programs that are different from anthropology but are in a related field? Does this lower your chances of being accepted into the program if you are coming from anthropology undergrad?
I can answer that. That's partially why I encourage students to work a few years before applying to grad school, just so that you know what else is out there. And especially for like sociocultural and linguistic anthropology, right? We don't have something explicit like CRM or like working in a medical lab. We don't have like direct paths, but the beauty about our subfields is actually how you can apply it to so many different other sectors of the workforce using anthropological knowledge. And it's actually really important to see what those applications are. For one, because even if you want to go back to grad school in anthropology, you really know how to have to work with people. That's like field work. So like, it's important to know how to actually work with people in very different settings. But exploring those other options, and then applying for like a master's program in like public health or social work or public policy, they love seeing anthropology undergrads. I would say in my experience, an overwhelming number of the people that they admit are like anthropology and sociology undergrads. So you are absolutely not at any disadvantage, right? And even like those who want to go to med school, you might have to come back and do some extra like prereqs or things. But those fields like to see people who have an anthropology background because of the ways that this discipline fosters your critical thinking skills, your reading skills, your writing skills, right? Those are important no matter what other grad program you go to.
I would say that definitely no. It doesn't hinder you, just like was mentioned. And I can say this based on 2 reasons. For one, I've had students that have gone to PA school, for example. I've had students that have gone into ecology in biology. We even have one former student that went to seminary school. And so we've had a lot of different diverse groups from students. When I was teaching at a PA school, we had anthropology graduates, cultural anthropology graduates that had gone to the community college, taken anatomy, whatever chemistry class they needed, and then got in. And yeah, bedside manner and things like that are ingrained in working with people. But the other reason why I know this is because I don't have an anthropology graduate program. Our graduate programs are interdisciplinary. And so not all the people I get for grad school are anthropology students. And the ones that are certainly just as suitable for some other track and program in GIS or something like that as anybody else. So it really doesn't matter. What matters is what you're doing, I think.
Thank you, Josh, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Do we have any final questions?
Yeah, I had a small follow-up question. I know Stacy mentioned don't apply for 18. I was wondering what might be the sweet spot number about how many grad schools you should apply for.
It is expensive, so that's something to keep in mind. But I think you'd be surprised how many schools you end up with after you do the selection process, right? So you might find, if you're really, really broadly interested, you might find 15 schools, right? And after you start looking deeper into the programs, which ones have funding, which ones do this, which one might be taking students, you might almost definitely end up with 3 to 5, right? Because they'll start to shed as you start to notice that, some of these are just not a good fit or unavailable or places you don't want to live or all these other things we've talked about. And so I would always start with like a big list and then start checking them off. That's how you end up in your sort of like your elite group of schools that you think are going to be the best fit. But and that goes way back to the very first thing. If you're independently wealthy, then you can apply to 100 schools, but practically it's expensive and it's taxing to be able to do all of this, especially if you're not copying and pasting your letter, right? So really I would try to narrow it down to a manageable amount. For me, I 5 was manageable for me when I was going in, but I'm also at the time bioarchaeology wasn't, I think I had a list of 10 total, and then when you consider that I was interested in teeth, that cut it down to like 3, right? And then I just added a couple of others, right? So the more specific you are to what your needs are for the program, the smaller your list is going to be.
And I think I'm actually in Lydia's boat right now. I think I start, because my focus is forensic, so I started off with like a list of 10. By the time I emailed professors, I think out of a dozen professors, like 3 got back to me. So now I'm down to 2 or 3 schools. A lot of professors are not taking students this year. Do we have any other questions? Otherwise, or any other last thoughts?
I have a comment.
Yes.
That is great off of what you just said. Don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged. The process is taxing, and you may not get into all the schools you want to get into, right? And it's emotionally destructive. When you put some work into something and then you learn that you're not in, right? But keep in mind that there are a lot of reasons students don't get into graduate programs, and of all of those reasons, only one of them is the actual applicant, right? So there's a lot of other things going on. People can't take students. They can't afford students. There's nowhere to put them. There's no research going on. The university cut the budget. And so, and I know a lot of us are going through budget stuff now. This is when it's happening right around the time where applications are coming in. So we don't know. If you talked to us 6 months ago, we're in a completely different budget year. So we don't know if we are going to be taking students. And so there are a lot of reasons why. And some faculty will actually email people and say like, look, I couldn't take you because of this. But if you've got 100 applicants, you can't really email 100 people and say like why you couldn't get into grad school. So and really it's the same in the job market. Honestly, there's a lot of reasons why you might not have gotten the job. And it's not necessarily because of you as an applicant. It's something else, right? And so I think it's impossible to not be upset And I think it's impossible to not be discouraged, but I will say, keep that in mind. You can still be an excellent student and you can still be an excellent applicant and not get into a program and it has nothing to do with you.
Thank you, Sandhya, for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
I just wanted to add that I have some colleagues of mine who really wanted to work with specific people because those people had a lot of success in placing their students into top universities in professor positions, and they had to go through multiple cycles of applying to work with them. Like, I don't take people every year. I have 2 students right now, and they take a lot of my time because I want to make sure they're successful and they get out of the program. So yeah, I think that you have to realize that you may have to apply multiple cycles, and that you shouldn't take it personally. It's so hard not to, but in academia, we get rejections all the time, whether it's from publications or grant agencies or applying for jobs. So it's simply part of the process, unfortunately.
All right, thank you guys for doing this. This is great. Loved it.